Section 6 of Mice and Men. The deep green pool of the Salinas River was still in the late afternoon. Already the sun had left the valley to go climbing up the slopes of the Gabillion Mountains, and the hilltops were rosy in the sun. But by the pool, among the mottled sycamores, a pleasant shade had fallen. What is the tone? How do you feel?
Pleasant tone.
It's pleasant. It's calm, right? A water snake glided smoothly up the pool, twisting its periscope head from side to side, and it swam the length of the pool and came to the legs of a motionless heron that stood in the shallows. A silent head and beak lanced down and plucked it out by the head, and the beak swallowed the little snake while its tail waved frantically. So again, here we have the theme that's present throughout this novel, survival of the fittest, right? You see it with the puppies, you've seen it with the old dog. Here it is again, coming up with this heron and the snake, okay? A far rush of winds bounded, and a gust drove through the tops of the trees like a wave. The sycamore leaves turned up their silver sides. The brown, dry leaves on the ground scudded a few feet, and row on row of tiny wind waves flowed up the pool's green surface. As quickly as it had come, the wind died, and the clearing was quiet again. The heron stood in the shallows, motionless and waiting. Another little water snake swam up the pool, turning its periscope head from side to side. And suddenly Lenny appeared out of the brush, and he came as silently as a creeping bear moves. The heron pounded the air with its wings, jacked itself clear of the water, and flew off downriver. The little snake slid in among the reeds at the pool's edge. Lenny came quietly to the pool's edge. He knelt down and drank, barely touching his lips to the water. How is that different from how we met him?
Earlier when he was super thirsty, he drank like a pig or like a horse or whatever it was.
Yeah, when we met him, he was making these noises, and it was guttural, and it was animalistic, right? And, you know, he's being loud and obnoxious, but here it's the complete opposite. He walks in, he's quiet, it's very calm and peaceful, and he meets that tone. When a little bird skittered over the dry leaves behind him, his head jerked, and he strained toward the sound with eyes and ears until he saw the bird, and then he dropped his head and he drank again. When he finished, he sat down on the bank with his side to the pool so that he could watch the trail's entrance. He embraced his knees and laid his chin down on his knees. The light climbed on out of the valley, and as it went, the tops of the mountains seemed to blaze with increasing brightness. Lenny said softly, "I forget you, pet. Goddamn hide in the brush and wait for George." He pulled his hat down low over his eyes. "George gonna give me hell. George gonna wish he was alone and not have me bothering him." He turned his head and looked up at the bright mountaintops. "I go right off there, find a cave," he said, and continued sadly, "and never have no ketchup, but I won't care. If George don't want me, I'll go away. I'll go away." And then from out of Lenny's head, there came a little fat old woman. She wore thick bull's-eyes glasses, and she wore a huge gingham apron with pockets, and she was starched and clean. She stood in front of Lenny and put her hands on her hips, and she frowned disapprovingly at him. And when she spoke, it was in Lenny's voice. "I told you, and I told you my George, because he's such a nice fella and good to you, but you don't ever take no care. You do bad things." And Lenny answered her. "I tried, Aunt Clara, ma'am. I tried and I tried. I couldn't help it." "You never gave a thought to George," she went on in Lenny's voice. "He been doing nice things for you all the time. When you get a piece of pie, you always get half or more than half. And if there was any ketchup, why, give it all to you." "I know," said Lenny miserably. "I tried, Aunt Clara, ma'am. I tried and tried." She interrupted him. "All the time, he could have had such a good time if it wasn't for you. He would have took his pay and raised hell in a whorehouse, and he could have sat in a pool room and played snooker, but he got to take care of you." Lenny moaned with grief. "I know, Aunt Clara, ma'am. I'll go right off in them hills and find a cave, and I'll live there, so I won't be no trouble to George." "You just say that," she said sharply. "You're always saying that, and you know, son of a bitch, and well, you ain't never gonna do it. You'll just stick around and stew the bejesus out of George all the time." And Lenny said, "Might as well just go away. George ain't gonna let me tend no rabbits now." Aunt Clara was gone, and from out of Lenny's head there came a gigantic rabbit. Is she really there? No. So what is he doing? He's imagining, he's hallucinating. Okay, so what purpose do you think this serves?
He's scared, he's upset, he's sad. He thinks he's not going to be able to be George ever again.
This is how he deals with his emotions, right? So he cannot internalize his emotions and deal with them on his own. So instead he projects them and talks with this person. Yes?
So he's kind of like schizophrenic.
No, it's not. I don't think it's as...
I don't mean like he's kind of like
murder someone like on purpose.
I don't think it's a mental illness. I think it has something to do with his developmental delays and the fact that he cannot do that on his own, so he projects someone else getting onto him because he can't get onto himself. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
He doesn't have the mental ability to do that. And so this is Steinbeck showing him going through this process. Aunt Clara was gone, and from out of Lenny's head there came a gigantic rabbit. It sat on its haunches in front of him, and it waggled its ears and crinkled its nose at him, and it spoke in Lenny's voice too. 10 rabbits, it said scornfully. You crazy bastard. You ain't fit to lick the boots of no rabbits. You forget 'em. Let 'em go hungry. That's what you do. And then what would George think? I would not forget, Lenny said loudly. The hell you wouldn't, said the rabbit. You ain't worth a grease pin jack to ram you into hell. Christ knows George done everything he could jack you out of the sewer, but it do no good. If you think George gonna let you tend a rabbit, you're even crazier than usual. He ain't. He gonna beat the hell out of you with a stick. That's what he's gonna do. And now Lenny retorted belligerently. He ain't neither. George won't do nothing like that. I knew George since, I forget when. And he ain't never raised his hand to me with a stick. He's nice to me. He ain't gonna be mean. Well, he's sick of you, said the rabbit. He's gonna beat the hell out of you and then go away and leave you. He won't, Lenny said frantically. He won't do nothing like that. I know George. Me and him travels together. But the rabbit repeated softly over and over. He gonna leave you, you crazy bastard. He gonna leave you all alone. He gonna leave you, you crazy bastard. Lenny put his hands over his ears. He ain't! I tell you he ain't! Oh, George! 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 George came quietly out of the brush, and the rabbit scuttled back into Lenny's brain. George said quietly, What the hell are you yelling about? Lenny got up on his knees. You ain't gonna leave me, are you, George? I know you ain't. George came stiffly near, and he sat down beside him. No, I knowed it. You ain't that kind. George was silent, and then he said, George, yeah, I done another bad thing. It don't make no difference, George said, and he fell silent again. Only the topmost ridges were in the sun now. The shadow in the valley was soft and blue. From the distance came the sound of men shouting to one another. George turned his head and he listened to the shouts, and then he said, George, yeah, ain't you gonna give me hell? Give you hell? Sure, you always done before, if I didn't have you, I'd take my $50. Jesus Christ, Lenny, you can remember nothing about what happens, but you can remember every word that I say? Well, ain't you gonna say it? George shook himself, and he said woodenly, If I was alone, I could live so easy. His voice was monotonous, had no emphasis. I could get a job and not have no mess. And he stopped. When he says it woodenly, monotonously, what does that mean?
With no emotion.
It means one thing.
He's not sad, just he's saying it to be saying it. The words don't mean anything to him. That's what monotonous means. Have you ever listened to someone read that says it in the exact same voice, the whole thing, and it's kind of boring? That's monotone, monotonous. Good job putting those Greek root words together, okay? It's no emotion. Go on, said Lenny. And when the end of the month come, I could take my $50 and go to a cat house. He stopped again. Lenny looked eagerly at him. Go on, George. Ain't you gonna give me no more hell? No, said George. Well, I can go away. I'll go right off them hills and find a cave if you don't want me. George shook himself again. No, I want you to stay with me here. And then he said craftily, Tell me like you've done before. Tell you what? About the other guys and about us. George said, Guys like us got no family. They make a little steak and then they blow it. They ain't got nobody in the world that gives a hoot in hell about them. But not us. Tell about us now. George was quiet for a moment. But not us, he said. Because I got you and I got you. And we got each other. And that gives a hoot in hell about us. Lenny cried in triumph. The little evening breeze blew over the clearing, and the leaves rustled, and the wind waves flowed up the green pool, and the shouts of men sounded again, this time much closer than before. George shook off his hat, and he said shakily, Take off your hat, Lenny. The air feels fine. Lenny removed his hat dutifully and laid it on the ground in front of him. The shadow in the valley was bluer, and the evening came fast. On the wind, the sound of crashing in the brush came to them, and Lenny said, Tell how it's going to be. George had been listening to the distant sounds for a moment. He was businesslike. Look across the river, Lenny, and I'll tell you so you can almost see it. Lenny turned his head and looked off across the pool and up the darkening slopes of the Gabillions. You're going to get a little place, George began, and he reached in his side pocket and brought out Carlson's Luger. He snapped off the safety, and the hand and gun lay on the ground behind Lenny's back. He looked at the back of Lenny's head, at the place where the spine and the skull were joined. A man's voice came from up the river, and another man answered. Go on, said Lenny. George raised the gun, and his hand shook, and he dropped his hand to the ground again. Go on. How's it going to be? We're going to get a little place. We'll have a cow, said George, and we'll have maybe pigs and chickens, and down the flat we'll have a little piece of alfalfa. For the rabbits, Lenny shouted. For the rabbits, George repeated. And I get to tend the rabbits. And you get to tend the rabbits. Lenny giggled with happiness. Oh, I live off the fat of the land. Yeah. Lenny turned his head. No, Lenny, look down there across that river, like you can almost see the place. Lenny obeyed him. George looked down at the gun. There were crashing footsteps in the brush now. George turned and looked towards them. Go on, George. When are we going to do it? Going to do it soon. Me and you? Yeah, you and me. Everybody going to be nice to you. Ain't nobody be no more trouble. Nobody going to hurt nobody nor steal from them. And Lenny said, I thought you was mad at me, George. Nah, said George. No, Lenny, I ain't mad. I've never been mad, and I ain't mad now. That's the thing I want you to know. The voices came close now. George raised the gun and listened to the voices, and Lenny begged, Let's do it now. Let's get that place now. Sure, right now. I gotta. We gotta. And George raised the gun and steadied it, and he brought the muzzle of it close to the back of Lenny's head. The hand shook violently, but his face set and his hand steadied. He pulled the trigger. The crash of the shot rolled up the hills and rolled down again. Lenny jarred, and then settled slowly forward to the sand, and he lay without quivering. George shivered, and he looked at the gun, and then he threw it from him, back up on the bank near the pile of old ashes. The brush seemed filled with cries and with the sound of running feet, and Slim's voice shouted, George? Where you at, George? But George sat stiffly on the bank and looked at his right hand that had thrown the gun away. The group burst into the clearing, and Curly was ahead. He saw Lenny lying on the sand. Got him, by God! He went over and he looked down at Lenny, and then he looked back at George. Right back of the head, he said softly. Slim came directly to George and sat down beside him, sat very close to him. Never you mind, said Slim. A guy got to sometimes. But Carlson was standing over George. How'd you do it, he asked. I just done it, said George tiredly. Did he have my gun? Yeah, he had your gun. And you got it away from him, and you took it and you killed him? Yeah, that's how, said George's voice, as it was almost a whisper. He looked steadily at his right hand that held the gun. Slim twitched George's elbow. Come on, George. Me and you, we'll go get a drink. George let himself be helped to his feet. Yeah, a drink. Slim said, You had it, George. I swear you had it. Come on with me. And he led George into the entrance of the trail and up towards the highway. Curly and Carlson looked after them, and Carlson said, Now, what the hell are you supposed to eat in them two guys? Did George have to do it?
Yeah.
Why?
Yeah, kind of.
He was going to get shot. When he was
They
going to
could
get
have
shot,
ran
he
away,
got-
but it would have happened.
They were gonna shoot him in an inhumane way where he
Was he going to die?
Yeah.
He was dying, right? How was Curly going to kill him?
make him suffer.
What event foreshadowed this happening?
Him grabbing the girl's dress.
Putting the dog down. Kind of the little girl, the girl in the lead, but more so the dog, okay? Because what is Candy's reaction to the dog?
He wanted to do it himself afterwards.
Yeah, he felt guilt afterwards of the whole, like, I should have done it. I should have killed my dog myself. So that's George remembering at that point in time, like, okay, I need to do this for Lenny, because how did Lenny leave this earth?
Peacefully.
Peacefully. Happy, right? And where were they?
At the river where I told him to go if anything ever happened.
At the brush. So it's full circle. We started this novel in one place, we went around, hit the whole story, and then ended it in the same place, right? Okay. What does the last line of the story say about those other characters?